Let's speak now to John McGuinness, Fianna Fáil TD, Chairman of the Oireachtas Finance Committee, who's in our studio this morning. John McGuinness, thanks for coming in to us. For people listening who are directly affected by what happened, those who believe they were overcharged by the banks on their mortgages, are you confident that they are going to be redressed and compensated by at the latest the end of next June?
Well, let's just look at what we were told at the Finance Committee meeting, which was no different than what the Minister has been told. It hasn't changed since then. So the story spun to him by the banks yesterday, over the last few days, and indeed his press conference, it gives you the same numbers. So the same number of people will be repaid before Christmas, but there's 14,400 that the banks have identified. Out of that number, only 3,500 have been paid. The rest have to be processed.
The majority by Allied Irish banks, yes?
All of them by Allied Irish banks, none of the rest of them. And even their attitude towards this programme here this morning is quite breathtaking because of everything that was said in the Dáil, and they still don't reply. They do not get it, that they have to be responsible to the Parliament and they have to acknowledge that the Central Bank is demanding of them action. Now, there are still those that are caught in vulture funds, there are those that have not been identified, and then there are those that have been identified and have been deemed not to be impacted by the last financial regulator. So the fact of the matter is that we have a huge problem here, which will go into 2018 and which will mean that the majority of people will simply not be paid. Remember that the individual closest to this at the coalface is Pádraig Kazan. And his
He's a financial advisor
yes, and came before the Finance Committee with those brave individuals who told everything about themselves, their health, their financial circumstances in order to bring some focus to this. And it is only because of their testimony that we have had this reaction from the government. The government haven't even met Pádraig Kazan in terms of the Taoiseach or the Minister for Finance. He has met with the Junior Minister, Michael Darcy.
If I can take it from your answer that you don't believe that those who are directly affected are going to be paid by June, what do you believe as a result of the meetings this week and Paschal Donohoe's statement yesterday, and the bank statement indeed, will happen then to the banks as a result of them not honouring commitments?
All of what was promised yesterday in terms of legislation and action does not apply retrospectively. It looks like a big stick to beat the banks, but actually, when you examine it, the banks rely heavily on legislation, have threatened to challenge legally the central bank at one stage.
My understanding was no legislation was promised yesterday, no?
No, change of legislation was promised, an action in terms of the shareholding of the banks was promised, and other promises were made. They won't affect the numbers because the fact is we're dealing with the legislation as it stands now, and that legislation has been challenged and manipulated by all of the banks. The central bank is not fit for purpose in relation to this. And the ECB, Michael Noonan referred to this in 2013, he said that in their oversight of the Irish banks, that the European Central Bank could possibly send people here to supervise the affairs of the central bank. That is what is needed. You need an outside focus determined to resolve this in the interest of best practice on regulation and protection and protecting the customers. And if you don't get that, you will simply get the same old story, the status quo, the banks dragging their feet, people being penalised by not being paid, and lives being ruined.
The other announcement that Paschal Donohoe made yesterday was a report to look into the culture of the banks. What's your understanding of what that's going to do?
We know so much about the culture of the banks. The fact is they haven't changed. The banking system has handed down a really terrible culture to the next generation of bankers. And they now believe that they are above the state, above the responsibility and transparency and accountability to the Parliament. That culture is strong within the banks, strong enough to believe that they are untouchable. So what's required here is that the banks need to appoint an ethical officer within each and every bank so that the minister can approve that person to oversee the changes that are necessary to break the culture that currently exists in the banks. Their attitude towards the public...
Why would that make any difference? Why would appointing an ethical officer within a bank to oversee change
There's ethical officers appointed in most of the financial services sector, and their responsibility is to ensure...
You can't make them do what you want to do, can you?
No, you can... The ethical officer acts on behalf of the citizen, on behalf of the Parliament, on behalf of the central bank.
And Catherine Connolly raised this in the Dáil last night. I thought that's what public interest directors were there for.
They're not doing it. So you need someone specifically designed, positioned, specifically designed, supported by legislation to ensure that this happens.
Who works for the banks.
It happens elsewhere in Europe, and it works. But if you don't have that, you will not break the disgusting culture that has driven the banking system to this. They have shamed the industry, they have shamed the country, and they have broken the lives of people.
There will be a lot of people listening this morning who will agree with your sentiments, who will agree with the frustration that you're feeling, agree with the frustration that they would have heard in many of the contributions to the Dáil last night, who will probably agree with some of the frustration that was evident in Paschal Donoghue's statement yesterday. But as you said, a little bit like with the declining of the banks to speak to us this morning, we've been here before. We were here in 2008, 2009 when your party was in power. We've been here right throughout the banking crisis, right throughout the bailout, and now. Why would people listening this morning be any more confident that anything is going to change?
But have they learned nothing? Has the government learned nothing? Has the political system learned nothing? They have abandoned these people from as far back as 2009, when Charlie Weston was writing about this. They've abandoned all of them through the course of 2010 and 15 when the central bank said it was going to take action. The only thing that has managed to force the political system to take action to date is the testimonies of the people who came forward. If it takes the Finance Committee to do all of that again, we will continue to do it until such time as the people are repaid. And remember this, that the tracker mortgage issue is only the tip of the iceberg. There is coming after that the manner in which the banks treated families, family businesses and the small business sector. They have yet to be dealt with.
We did just receive a note from PTSB, one of those we asked to speak to us this morning but declined. They say that please note that over 1,300 impacted customers of PTSB have received redress and compensation in relation to the tracker issue. They say that I and you, John McGuinness, have both made an incorrect suggestion on this point in recent minutes.
No, I haven't. I've been quoting the figures from the minister's statement. And remember this, it was the banks who went all the way to the courts on different cases. And having lost those cases, that bank continued to say that customers were not impacted, even though they had the same circumstances as the case that had just been won.
And I've also been pointed out that when I said Ulster Bank haven't come back to us, they say they did come back to us yesterday to say that they wouldn't speak to us. John McGuinness, thank you.
They should be speaking to you.
John McGuinness, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. We'll speak to Michael Darcy later in the programme.